सर पे कफन बांध के देखो, बजरंगी की फौज चली, गली गली में मात भवानी का गूंजा जयकारा है। कहो गर्व से हम हिंदू हैं,
श्री राम जन्मभूमि के निर्माण का पवित्र कार्य पूर्व घोषणानुसार पूर्व निर्धारित तिथि मार्गशीर्ष शुक्ल द्वादशी तदनुसार दिनांक 6 दिसंबर 1992 के मध्याह्न 12:15 पर शुभ मुहूर्त में प्रारंभ करने की घोषणा करता है। जय श्री राम, जय श्री राम।
इसको केवल मंदिर मस्जिद विवाद के नाते नहीं देखा जाना चाहिए। इसकी पृष्ठभूमि विदेशी आक्रमण की।
मैं विश्वास करता हूँ कि उसकी यह उत्कट इच्छा अवश्य पूरी होगी और कोई राम मंदिर के निर्माण को रोक नहीं सकेगा।
Ayodhya movement is one of the longest run movements in the history of civilization. India's freedom movement ran for 90 years, whereas Ayodhya movement stretched for a whopping 492 years. A movement of such a grand scale, unbelievable. But despite it, people are not aware of most of the facts of the movement, especially the details about the first 400 years of the movement. People don't know what happened on the day when Babur's army entered the Ram Temple at Ayodhya. Whether Hindus resisted or not, how this movement began immediately after that, how the movement progressed all through 16th, 17th, 18th and 19th century, how the Arabic and Persian scholars of that era looked at this entire matter, what was Britishers' view, and so many other relevant facts. Therefore, we must have a comprehensive relook at the entire 492-year period of Ayodhya movement. Now, to have a relook at the movement, we shall start not from the year 1528, when Babur demolished the Ram Temple at Ayodhya. We shall go further in the history to 12th century, when the Ram Temple was constructed. There is reason for it. In 12th century, 3 very large temples were constructed exclusively dedicated to Lord Ram. One was at Rajim in current Chhattisgarh, the second was at Tripur, and the third, of course, was at Ayodhya at the Ram Janmabhoomi. Now, Rajim Temple and Tripur Temple still exist today. They have inscriptions inside them which clearly say that these temples were built in dedication to Lord Ram. But why the left historians, who in the later phase of the movement sided with the pro-Babri party, they never talk about these 2 temples? It is because these left historians took a stand that Ram worship was a phenomenon that began only in 18th and 19th century. So they said it is not possible that a Ram temple existed in 16th century, which was demolished by Babur. Now we come to the year 1528, when Babur demolished the Ayodhya temple. Here it is relevant to know that Babur constructed total 3 mosques. One at Panipat to mark his victory over Lodi dynasty. Second one was at Sambhal in Madhya Pradesh. Now this Sambhal mosque was constructed after demolishing a Vishnu temple in Sambhal. Now the widespread belief was that the next avatar of Vishnu, that is Kalki avatar, would take birth in Sambhal's temple. So Babur could not tolerate it and he demolished the temple and built the mosque. Now these facts are established by Archaeological Survey of India's findings, which they have detailed in their 12th volume of the findings. There is also a painting of the Sambhal Mosque created by Thomas Daniel and William Daniel, on which it is mentioned that this mosque was built after demolishing a Hindu temple, and this painting is still present in London Museum. Now the third mosque was built by Babur after demolishing the Ram temple at Ayodhya. So in 1528 in Ayodhya, the glory and prosperity of Hindus and the fame of the beautiful temple was increasing, and it became the subject of envy for the local Muslims. They approached a Muslim religious leader named Pir Ashi Khan and requested him to do something in the matter. Now, very interestingly, this man, Pir Ashi Khan, was also a disciple of the priest of the Ram Temple at that time, Pandit Shyamanand. But the Islam in him got awakened, and he, assisted by another fellow, Shah Jalan, approached Babur and instigated him for demolition of the temple. Now, some Muslim scholars have also written that long before Babur came to India to conquer it, he, as a young prince, had already come to Ayodhya in disguise and had met Pir Ashi Khan for his blessings to conquer Hindustan. Pir Ashi Khan had said that he would give his blessings, but in return, the young Babur must make a promise that once he conquered Hindustan, he would demolish the temple. So all these facts are mentioned by Persian, Arabic and Urdu scholars of those times. Two of them are Gumastay Halat-e Ayodhya by Abdul Karim and Tarikh-e Daudi by Abu Illah. And these have been meticulously collected by the researcher Harsh Narayan in his book. And Harsh Narayan book is a book which was mentioned and referred to in the recent Supreme Court hearing or even in the High Court hearing in the 2010-9, 2008 and 7 period.
1814 में बुकानन आया। बुकानन ने पहली बार इस बात को देखा कि यहाँ पर इंस्क्रिप्शन है, और वो इंस्क्रिप्शन जो बुकानन ने देखा था किया गया, जिसमें ये था कि मूसा के कहने पर, मूसा आशी खान के कहने पर बाबर ने ये स्थान तोड़कर और मस्जिद बनाने की कोशिश की।
Now we come to the very interesting part. When Babur's army under his commander Mir Baqi reached Ayodhya in the year 1528 to demolish it, Hindus resisted it, and the confrontation continued for 17 days. After 17 days, ultimately, Babur's army could enter the temple. The famous Flemish Indologist Conrad Elst writes that inside the temple, Pandit Shyamanand and his family again resisted Mir Baqi. But ultimately, Pandit Ji and his family got martyred. Then Pandit Ramadin and Raja Mahatab Singh put an offensive for several days. But they too could not succeed. But Hindus did not stop here either. Then Rana Ranvijay Singh of Hansawar, he battled for 10 days. Several times his warriors dominated the battle but could not sustain again. Yet again Hindus did not accept defeat. Such was the zeal to defend the temple, to defend the Rama Temple at Ayodhya, that Rana Vijay's queen, Rani Jairaj Kumari, and her spiritual guru, Maheshanand, then waged a guerrilla war against Mir Baqi's soldiers. They won several times, but ultimately both of them got martyred. Still, Hindus did not stop their struggle to defend the temple. Now here, Maheshanand's disciple Swami Balram Chari led 20 campaigns. He again won several times, but ultimately he too could not sustain. And all these facts have been researched upon by several historians with the aid of documents from those eras. The renowned historian Conrad Elst is also among those historians who have mentioned all these things. Then one Thakur Gajraj Singh and his men also launched an offensive against Babur's soldiers to defend the temple. They also could not succeed. Then Thakur Gajraj Singh took a vow that no Kshatriya would wear a turban and leather shoes until they would take back the Ram Temple. A former judge of Allahabad High Court has also recently spoken on this fact. So these days you must be hearing that the Kshatriya community around Ayodhya have now said that they would start wearing turban and leather shoes after 500 years when the temple is going to be constructed. Now, before we further move on this topic, let's first talk about evidences. Generally, we know that archaeological findings were the only evidences in favor of the existence of a Rama temple beneath the Babri mosque. But let me tell you that archaeological findings are only a small part of the large spectrum of evidences. These are innumerable documentary evidences which clearly say that Babur demolished the Ram temple and built the mosque. And these documentary evidences are the writings by Persian, Arabic and Urdu scholars of earlier centuries. Some of them are Jana al-Mashriq by Maulana Hakim Saeed, then Sipahi Chihal Bahadur Shahi, written by the granddaughter of Emperor Aurangzeb, then Asrar-e Haqiqat by a person and who was assisted by Maulvi Hakim, then Tarikh-e Awadh by Muhammad Najmul Ghani Khan, then Diya-e Sakhtar by Haji Muhammad Hassan, then Afdal-ut-Tawarikh by Maulvi Tamanna, then Murakha-e Khushwai by Sheikh Azmat Ali, and there are various other Persian books. Apart from these, there are various accounts written by the foreign travelers like William Jones, like Father Tiffin Teller, and then also there are a lot of epigraphical evidences. All these have been painstakingly collected by Harsh Narayan, the great researcher, whose book was referred to in the High Court and Supreme Court several times. The famous book of Hans Backer, titled Ayodhya, also mentions how Babur demolished the temple and built the mosque. Hans Backer's book was quoted for maximum number of times in the High Court and Supreme Court. Apart from these records, there are also British records which clearly say that this Ram temple was demolished by Babur and then a mosque was built over it. Now we move further. Mandir movement continued in 17th and 18th century too, but in different form. It was no more confrontationary as Mughals had become very strong. So the movement in these 2 centuries was that the Hindus kept coming in large numbers and kept offering puja to Ram Lala in and around the structure which Babur had built after demolishing Ram's temple. Now here 2 sources which speak about it are the descriptions by a famous traveller named William Flinch. The second is the description by Father Tiffin Teller. They came to Ayodhya on different times in 18th century, stayed in Ayodhya for several years. Describing Ayodhya, they mention about the Hindu pilgrims taking parikrama around the Ram Janmasthan, Brahmins taking bath in Sarju river, the presence of a Vedi, a Palna kept for Ram Lala, and various facts. But very interestingly and very significantly, these 2 travelers have never mentioned that any Muslim was there or any Muslim was doing any namaz. So it shows that this mosque which was built by Babur was on the demolished Ram temple, and also that for Muslims it was not a significant mosque. There is also no record that it was called Babri mosque in those centuries. All records say that it was referred to either the Janmasthan or Masjid-e Janmasthan or Masjid-e Sita Rasoi. Now at the beginning of 19th century, Mughals started becoming weak. From here, the Ayodhya movement again began to take a spirited shape. In 1822, for the first time, the dispute between Hindu and Muslims over this matter entered the court. And here, a court officer, Hafizullah, prepared a note and wrote that the temple was demolished and mosque was built. So the very first court entry in the entire history of this matter mentions that the temple was demolished and a mosque was built over that. In 1855, first arms conflict took place when a Sunni leader Ghulam Hussain attacked the Hanumangadi temple and Hindus around the Janmasthan. Nawab of Awadh, on the instruction from Britishers, tried to stop him, but he failed. But ultimately Hindus stood up and killed 17 Muslim attackers. Then again one Sunni leader named Amir Ali attacked, but Britishers killed him too. These facts are mentioned in Faizabad District Gazetteer and in other records as well. In 1856 again, due to confrontation between Hindu and Muslim, Britishers put a railing in the mosque, and around the same year a chabutra was also built for Hindus to offer puja. Now from here onwards, all the conflicts are recorded. In 1857, the uprising against the Britishers took place, and during it, Nawab of Awadh promised to Hindus that their entire land of Janmasthan would be given back to them. But unfortunately, Britishers took hold and this promise of Nawab could not be fulfilled. Now on 28 November 1858, a very interesting incident took place. 25 Sikhs crossed the railing and entered the inner part of the mosque. They did puja, and with charcoal, they wrote the names of Rama on the walls. Now, significantly, no Muslim files a complaint, no Muslim protests, and no Muslims files an FIR. The FIR is filed by the Thanedar. So, this incident is important because it shows that Muslims did not think this mosque as significant and important for them. Second, the Thanedar writes in the FIR that Hindus for long have been performing puja outside, and now they are doing the puja inside also. So this recorded Hindu presence demolishes the Muslims' later arguments of the law of adverse possession that Hindus were never present inside the mosque. Allahabad High Court later in its hearing said that this noting by Thanedar was a very, very important document. Now on 30 November 1858, the in charge of the mosque writes a letter that Hindus are doing havan inside the mosque. In 1860, the in charge of mosque again writes a letter to the court and requests for demolition of chabutra on which Hindus were performing puja, but court rejects, saying that Hindus have been doing the puja since long and it cannot be demolished. Now in 1861, the first revenue record is prepared by the Britishers. In the record, while referring to the land in question, Britishers mention the word Janmasthan and not Masjid. Now this is a very important document. Later an attempt was also made to tamper with this evidentiary document. We would discuss it later. Now Hindus again continued the Ayodhya movement and built a small room in the premises about which the superintendent of the mosque wrote a complaint. In 1870, the Britishers sent one settlement officer. His name was Patrick Carnegie. Now Patrick Carnegie wrote in his report that Hindus had been worshipping inside the mosque till 1855, and then after a railing was created for them to do puja outside. Now later Allahabad High Court treated it as a very important document because it demolished the Muslims' argument that Hindus never did puja inside the temple. Then again Hindus took the Ayodhya movement further in the next year, and in 1872 Hindus put a Charan Paduka and built a chulha inside the complex. Again in 1877 they now put a big chulha inside the complex. All these are recorded in the form of mosque's in charge letter to administration. In 1877, for Ramanavami, a huge crowd of Hindus gathered at the gate of Janmasthan complex, and to ease the situation, an extra gate was built in the north side of the complex. So again it shows that Britishers also considered it a well-established fact that it was the Janmasthan and rightfully belonged to the Hindus. Now in 1882, a very important incident took place. The in charge of the masjid wrote a letter to the district court. In the letter he said that the Mahanta of the Janmasthan had been sharing with him the revenue earned from the rent from shops inside the complex in 50-50 ratio. But now he complains that he says that Mahanta had changed the ratio, and he requests to the court that this 50-50 ratio should be restored. But court rejected his demand and said that you yourself had admitted that entire land did not belong to the masjid, So Mahanta was right in his changing the ratio. Now 1885 is a very important date. The first formal demand for construction of a temple on Janmasthan was put forward in this year 1885 by the Mahant of Janmasthan, Raghuvar Ram. But court rejected his demand, and it was also rejected in subsequent 2 appeals by him. But the district court and a judge named Chemier said on civil appeal number 27 dated 18 March 1886 that it was unfortunate that the mosque had been built on a land considered sacred by Hindus, but he cannot order for temple construction as it would disturb the peace. However, he permits for construction of a tent and a wooden structure over it. In the same year, an Amin commission is formed which says in its report that the deep depression all around the complex was formed due to the parikrama done by Hindus for centuries. It proved that the entire land belonged to temple. Otherwise, Hindus would not have done parikrama around the structure. Now the movement enters 20th century. In 1912, a riot broke out in Ayodhya and Faizabad over the matter of cow slaughter. The chief secretary writes a letter to the union secretary that the root cause of all these disturbances is the fact that Babur had built the mosque after demolishing a Rama Temple. Now this is the confirmation that Britishers too officially recorded that Babur had demolished the temple. In 1915, the Lieutenant Governor visits Faizabad and writes a report that it is very difficult for any outsider to understand the depth of sentiment of Hindus for this holy place. Now this letter is still kept very safe in the National Archives. Now in 1934, a riot again broke out in Shahjahanpur and Hindus damaged the Babri mosque which was illegally constructed by Babur. To appear as a balanced government, they put a fine of rupees 85,000 on Hindus for this damage to the mosque. In the same year, Nirmohi Akhada began the management of Janmasthan. Now, what is Nirmohi Akhada? Nirmohi Akhada was founded by Ramanand Acharya Bairagi in 1400 AD, well before Babur was even born. And this Nirmohi Akhada was founded to provide security to Hindu places of worship. It had 3 branches: Nirmohi Ani, Nirvani Ani and Digambar Ani. Now Nirvani Ani got the responsibility of Hanuman Gadhi, Digambar Ani got the responsibility for Tirupati, Balaji, and Nirmohi Ani got the responsibility to protect Janmasthan. Now interestingly, it was in the Gwalior ashram of Nirmohi Akhada that Queen of Jhansi, known as Rani Lakshmi Bai, she took shelter during her battle against the Britishers, and the people from Nirmohi Akhada nursed her, and ultimately she breathed her last in the Gwalior's branch of Nirmohi Akhada. Now there is a very interesting development in 1944. United Province Government makes a list of all the mosques. Against the name of each masjid, there were 4 columns. Name of the masjid, year it was built in, who built it, and the Waqf board attached to it. Now it was very important because without the Waqf board, there cannot be any mosque. Now in this list, against the Babri masjid, all columns were filled up except the Waqf column, which was vacant. Now much later, when the matter reached Allahabad High Court, the court had asked the pro-Babri party, how could a mosque exist without any Waqf? So how can you explain this blank column? The pro-Babri party could not answer this with satisfaction. Then the court had remarked that it was a major weakness in the arguments of the pro-Babri party. Immediately after that, in 1944, the Sunni Waqf board sent a notification that it was now registering the Babri mosque under it. However, this notification was later declared illegal by the court. In 1943, the mosque in charge wrote a letter to the Sunni Waqf board that it was very difficult to do namaz because of Hindu presence. So this again shows that Hindus were constantly present there for puja. Now in 1945, Shia Waqf Board approaches the court and says that the mosque should be under the Shia Waqf Board and not under the Sunni Waqf Board because Mir Baqui was a Shia. It is a different matter that later the Shia Waqf Board said that entire land should go to the Hindus. Now in 1946, the court gave a verdict against Shia Waqf Board, but Shia Waqf Board challenged this verdict in the Supreme Court in the year 2018. Now in 1947, India gets independence. And the same year, first demand in independent India for building the Rama Temple is raised by Hindus to UP government.